Hey everyone, Mulligan here, and welcome to part 2 of the spoiler preview for set 4, which we now know is called the Fall of Argenport. In this video, I'll talk about most of the cards from the upcoming expansion that have been spoiled in the past week or so. As with previous videos, I'll only be talking about the cards as far as their use and constructed, unless the card is absolutely terrible in that format, in which case I will briefly talk about its potential use in the limited formats, which are draft and sealed. Let's hop in. First up is Won't Be Pretty. This is a 3-power spell requiring 1 fire influence to play. You choose 2 enemy units. The enemy player chooses 1 to be dealt 6 damage. They play a +1/+1 weapon on the other. So this is the second card we've received that gives your opponent a choice on what happens. The first one being Diesel with his ability generating a Cabal Extortion Scheme. This isn't quite the same though, because both of the choices from Extortion Scheme are bad. And the unit that doesn't take the damage gets the weapon. I don't think this is constructed viable, but it might be okay in limited just because removal is so scarce in those formats. It might even be risky there though. Next is Claw of Curios. This is a 3-power 3/3 unit requiring 1 time and 1 primal influence to play, and it has Killer. Not much to say on this one, since the fact that this doesn't have a rarity symbol on the card means it's not an actual card, but something that's generated by another card, similar to the Sheep token we saw. People have speculated we may get an Exodia style version of Curios in the upcoming set based on this, similar to what the Yu-Gi-Oh card game had in the early days. Mechanics like that are usually not viable in a constructed format, but it's still best to wait until we see the rest of the set before calling something like this bad. Next we have Void Drummer. This is a 3-power 2/2 unit requiring 2 Shadow Influence to play. It is unblockable, and when Void Drummer attacks, units in your Void get +2/+2. So I think this card's pretty interesting. It'll help Void recursion strategies, but the Void decks we have don't really need this in the current meta. Sentinel Reanimator can't play this unless they decide to drop Primal for the Shadow faction. Haunting Scream decks could run this, but most lists are very tight and only have but so many flex slots. But that depends on how the meta shifts too. I could see Void Drummer fitting into Scream decks based on what decks are popular. Like in the case of the Justice Primal Shadow Scream decks, some lists run Harsh Rule and Mokto. Maybe those get cut for Void Drummer. I'm more interested in this card fitting into a whole new Reanimator deck. We'll need to see what else is in this set to support that type of deck though. Up next is Rindra's Choice. This is a 2-power fast spell requiring 1 primal and 1 shadow influence to play, and you can choose to either kill an enemy unit with more than 1 faction, or negate an enemy spell with more than 1 faction. Very strong card for Feln. This is definitely constructed playable. I thought choice cards would only be limited to the Scions, the main characters of Eternal. I really didn't expect other characters in the Eternal lore to get choice cards, so seeing this opens up a lot of possibilities. Anyway, this is more than welcome for any deck running Primal and Shadow. It's cheap, it's a fast spell, and it deals with multi-faction units. Something that's lacking with the current card pool. The lack of answers were what led to people realizing a few months back that playing multi-faction units are really good since they're immune to Annihilate. This addresses that issue. The second half of the spell won't be used nearly as much, I feel, but I still expect every Feln deck to be running a few copies of this card. Up next we have Dramatist Mask. This is a 4-power 1/1 weapon requiring 2 fire influence to play. It has charge, and at the start of your turn, sacrifice the wielder to play a random unit from your deck, then play a copy of Dramatist Mask on it. So the name on this is subject to change apparently, but we'll still take a look at it. This card is cool, and it might be the beginning of the return of the Charge Rod archetype. But it's very tricky because you have to sacrifice the unit you put it on, and you will need that unit to survive the enemy turn before you start getting value. You also might have to run units that you don't necessarily care about if they die on your turn. If the opponent has no answer to this card, it will snowball though. It also wears Warcry really well. This seeing play and constructed will depend on what else we get. I'm not quite sold on this card, but there's some potential. Next we have Kenna, Shaman of the Scale. This is a 7 power 5/6 unit requiring 3 primal influence to play. She has Killer. When you play a spell, Kenna gets +2/+2 and flying this turn, and she also has Tribute, where you draw a spell from your void. Lita, eat your heart out. I've spent a lot of time testing Lita in unseen tribal decks, and one thing I can say is that 5 attack is way more meaningful than 4 on a killer unit. Lita heavily relies on unseen commando being alive in order to be good. This straight up gives you a 5/6 without any outside help. Kenna is a bit pricey, but I still think she's fairly costed since killer is immediate value. She won't kill most popular 6 or 7 drops, but killer is more about getting 2-for-1s than simply just trading. Killer alone makes Kenna viable. But let's talk about the rest of the card. I don't think you necessarily have to play her in a spell heavy deck. The temporary flying ability and stat buff are just icing on the cake, not something you should build your deck around. She might be okay in something like FTP Moment, if that ends up being viable again, but the deck can't really take advantage of the Tribute ability, which I'll talk about in a second. Mola and Nikova just feels too expensive in FTP Moment at times, at least in my experience. Anyway, Tribute is a new mechanic that's activated when the card is first summoned. When a Tribute card is played, it gets a bonus if a unit has already gone to your void that turn. So recurring a spell and getting to remove something with Killer makes this card pretty insane, at least for any decks that can take advantage of it. This is one of my favorite cards from this set so far. The next card is an update on Clan Standard, and we finally get to find out what Clan Tactic is. It's a 2 power fast spell requiring 1 primal influence to play, and you deal 5 damage to an attacking enemy. So people were expecting a card draw spell, and so was I, as far as what Clan Tactic was. Instead we get a pumped up Lightning Strike, which isn't bad, considering it generates off of a power card. Even an effect like this makes Clan Tactic viable for constructed, especially since 5 damage is a lot more than 4. Next we have Aerial Battle. This is a 3 power spell requiring 2 primal influence to play, and you deal 5 damage to each unit with flying. I doubt this replaces Hailstorm, since that does 3 damage to everything and doesn't care what unit it is. This might see some tournament play though, in particular as a sideboard card against certain strategies. TJP midrange hates this card, by the way. Really, any Huru-based midrange deck, since all the good units in that faction have flying. At absolute worst, this sees play in limited formats. Since flying is so highly valued in limited, this just destroys any threat that's clocking you in the air. Elysian decks especially will love picking this up in draft or sealed if their unit base leans heavy on time units, since most of those don't fly. Although things like 4th Tree Elder will still get around this card. Next we have Long Live the Queen. This is a 4 power fast spell requiring 1 Justice and 1 Primal Influence to play. It has Warp. You negate an enemy spell and you draw a card. I'm really baffled that Huru is getting a Warp card. I don't really like it design-wise, since I always thought something like Warp would be exclusive to Praxis, or at least some multi-faction involving fire or time. I'm generally not a fan of a completely different faction or color combination getting the same skill as the original faction or color combination, especially when it doesn't seem to fit with the other faction's theme. But the warp mechanic probably won't be a big factor on a card like this. 4 cost makes this very clunky for a counterspell in general, and the situation is extremely specific in order to get value off of warp. I don't think this will see play in constructed. Not when we have stuff like Unseal, which is half the cost, despite not having warp. Next we've got Silverwing Augmentor, a 7 power 3/3 unit requiring 2 Justice Influence to play. He has flying, and when he comes into play you may give another unit +5/+5 this turn. So I'll go ahead and say that this isn't constructed viable. However, I think it's pretty good in limited formats. Flying is the best battle skill you could have on a unit in limited, since they're extremely difficult to block and removal is scarce. Even a 3/3 body on a flyer is decent. Look at Huru Fledgling, which costs 5 and is still picked for limited decks. The Nostrix-like effect is icing on the cake, especially since it's not tied to Mentor, although the buff is not permanent. There are better 7-drops you can run in limited, but this isn't a bad pick there. So one final card that was revealed was Sack the City, but we have no idea what Berserk does yet. We just know it's a new mechanic, so I'll hold off on reviewing that card until then. But did want to thank you all for listening to my thoughts on the most recent spoilers from the upcoming set that we got in the past week or so. If you liked the video, feel free to hit the like button. Let me know in the comments if you have any feedback for the content and what brews you guys are thinking about trying when the new set finally drops. I've got other Eternal content on this channel as well, so feel free to look around. And if you like what you see, consider subscribing to the channel so you don't miss future videos. Thanks for taking time out of your day to watch this. I'll see you all soon. Take care.